would like to tell you my story, skipping my childhood in England and starting off with my Mills and Boon experience when I arrived at a Hereford bull stud in 1961, halfway between Roma and Injune here in Queensland. Trained as a children's nanny when I left school at age 18 and armed with my certificate at age 21, I was eager to learn about life in the bush. It was Easter weekend and I was taken to a local dance in a large tin shed in the middle of nowhere. Being jigged around the dance floor by a cowboy wearing spurs, there was an "excuse me" dance announced, and I was suddenly confronted by a tall and handsome man, well dressed, asking me to change partners. Well, that was it. He took me to supper at the dance and drove me back to the property where I was working. About 3 weeks later, we were engaged, and I had to send a message to my dad in an aerogram form to ask if I could stay and get married, which I did. Life moved along nicely, and I loved the life out west, even though it was rather primitive. No running water in the house and no electricity, but I could already ride a horse, so that was useful. But of course, the actual riding through the scrub and jumping gullies to muster cattle was not exactly the kind of riding I'd been used to. Married in Brisbane by a priest who had known the Simpson family as a bush brother, we managed 4 children nicely spaced out, and they all loved their home, their local primary school, and then off to boarding school in Toowoomba. Mustering our cattle was all done in the school holidays, so we didn't need to employ any other helpers. This was when my husband's mental health caused him to behave as a completely different personality, turning very violent, abusive, destructive, angry, and threatening my life with a gun or strangulation. I had no way of escaping these episodes, as he would lock away the car and truck keys and disconnect our phone line, so I had no means of calling our neighbours for help, and the nearest to our home were 2 kilometres away. This was a very horrid and frightening time, and of course I did try and get him to seek professional help, but he would not agree to that. I spoke to our family doctor in town, but there was very little help or advice, and I felt he was more or less saying that I was causing my husband's mental illness. He did offer a new prescription, but my husband would not take those pills. 2 years of this difficult relationship resulted in one especially very violent evening when my husband grabbed me in the dark as I was coming back into the house after locking up our chooks. He dragged me into the bathroom whilst waving a carving knife and yelling that he could easily kill me with that knife. He locked me in. I waited until he'd gone into the bedroom, and then I managed to squeeze out of the small window. I had a few clothes hidden on our veranda in a toy cupboard, so I changed into a dark brown tracksuit and walked through the scrub to our next door neighbour, who was 2 kilometres away. Rather scary, as I did not think a torch would be safe to use, and I was not familiar with the layout of their paddocks. I did get to their house eventually, and they drove me into Roma, and I stayed with the parish priest for the night, and then got a lift from a friend who was going to Brisbane. I was eventually housed in a lovely bungalow at Wellington Point, which was owned by the Family Protection Group, who were very helpful and called regularly to see how I was coping. The 2 youngest children joined me for school holidays, which they loved, and my eldest daughter was working in Sydney. My son was with me in our safe house, and he found work locally on a flower growing farm. We had a very special 12 months at the coast. My husband contacted me through a cousin of his who lived in Brisbane, and some conditions were made which helped me to decide to return to the farm and continue our marriage. This lasted for another 4 years, when violence began again and I decided to leave for good in 1982. My children were all older and able to look after themselves. All had jobs, and my son and I decided Warwick was a good place to make a fresh start. And here I am.